Hello, and welcome to CyberDeck Users Weekly, a weekly podcast that happens all the time. Very frequently, there are episodes of this show that you're listening to. So where have I been? I have been busy. I feel like it's like half to blame that I've been working really hard on other stuff that isn't the podcast, and half to blame of me not setting aside time and working hard on the podcast and the newsletters and stuff. So I'm sorry. I want to do better. I hope I do better. I'm reading this book, How Innovation Works by Matt Ridley, which is weird. Like, I feel like I've heard it. Anyways, I've heard about this book a bunch of times, and I was like, meh. I finally got around to getting it, and it's just amazing. So I highly recommend it. He's got this line: people prefer to be thought brilliant rather than merely hardworking. A lot of the book is about the difference between like invention and innovation. Innovation is like the hard, grindy work often of popularizing an invention, and that the popularization is kind of the more important part. So anyways, I think I typically have erred in my life on wanting to be thought of as brilliant instead of being the hard worker one. So I'm trying to go in the other direction, but I don't know if that's totally a valid excuse for not doing my podcast. But I want you to know that I am working very hard in lots of ways on things I'm proud of, just not this podcast right now and the newsletter. And I kind of feel really bad actually about Patreon in that sense. So yeah, I'm sorry if I'm stealing your Patreon dollars, but anyways, I'll try to do better. But thank you for your Patreon dollars. And speaking of support, I have my very first ad this week. This was a joke thing, not a joke. I actually spent a lot of time setting this up. There's a BTC Pay server running somewhere on the planet, and its sole purpose is to generate invoices for ads for this podcast. And by ads, I mean fake ads, because I don't really like real advertising. But I thought it'd be funny if people would pay me Bitcoin, I would come up with a fake ad for them, and then they would just give me a prompt. And so this week we have our very first ad from Brian, who says GPT-4 wants your Bitcoin. Well, let me say that again without stuttering, because I'm really grateful to you, Brian. GPT-4 wants your Bitcoin. So with that as a prompt, here is the very first ad on CyberDeck Users Weekly. Cue the music. You've heard of GPT-3, that AI that can write like a human and usually makes as much sense, more sense than one. But have you heard of GPT-4? GPT-4 is just this guy you see, and if you send him some Bitcoin, he'll send you double that amount back. He just wants to give back to the community. Thank you, GPT-4. I know what you're saying. This sounds too good to be true. Yeah, but remember how GPT-3 was like seriously impressive? And you kept on being like, no way an AI wrote this. Yeah, so just imagine how good GPT-4 is at doubling Bitcoin. Something to think about. Anyway, some other things to know about GPT-4. It's the part of weed that does get you high, with none of the health benefits like better sleep. As socks, GPT-4 rejects all sweat. As underwear, GPT-4 is pure sweat to the point where it's kind of refreshing. GPT-4 has solved layer 1 scaling. GPT-4 has solved the network effect chicken and egg problem of creating an alternative social media platform. GPT-4 is the part of 5G that doesn't make you sick. GPT-4 is actually just the TikTok algorithm. Pretty amazing, I know. Okay, so if you'd like to have your Bitcoin doubled by some guy on the internet named GPT-4, please send your BTC to any address that starts with 123 iTunes Street, and he'll know what to do from there. Use promo code CYBERDECK for 50% off your first doubling. Okay, let's get back to the show. All right. Thanks, Brian. And the funny thing and the thing, this was a very special ad to me, not just because it's my first ad and because it was in Bitcoin, but because I halfway written an essay to be a podcast episode about GPT-3. And I was like, I don't know, Saturday, I've got a lot more work to do, a lot of projects. I don't know if I'll do my podcast today. Maybe I'll just, work on a bit. I'll check my BTC Pay server invoices. Here's Brian with a prompt for an ad that happens to line up with what I wanted to talk about. I just felt like a real sign that I should stop screwing around and do a podcast. So here we go. So, like I said in the intro, I'm reading a book called How Innovation Works by Matt Ridley. And another great insight in this book is that people tend to think poorly of specific innovations unless they're like close enough to that innovation to see what its positive effects are. If they don't have they have to be in a very specific position to appreciate an innovation. And so a lot of innovations get a bad rap at start from a wider public. So an example would be like a house painting. Like if you make this weird robot for painting a house, like most people don't paint houses very often. So that's like, whatever. Or that looks dumb, LOL is what I wrote. And they move on with their day. So that's just it's not very valuable to them. So, whatever. If you run a house painting business, this is awesome. But if you are a house painter, you might actually hate this because maybe it displaces your job, or at least you might think it will. So it's like you have to be this very specific person, someone who's running a house painting business, but who benefits from the reduction in physical labor to really appreciate this. And so his much better example in the book is the actual origin story of steam power, and this idea of the first usage and the first motivation for steam power was to pump water uphill out of flooded coal mines. And they were literally burning coal from the mine. They needed this ridiculous high quantity of coal to even make this work. And you needed a flooded mine to have a need for a pump. You need to be a very specific person, an owner of a flooded coal mine, willing to do some experimenting with a weird steam contraption. And so in hindsight, it's easy to see all the great things you could use steam power for. But at the time, that innovation could only really catch on for a very specific person for a very specific reason. So, of course, thinking about GPT-3, it's all over my Twitter timeline. Everybody's come up with some cool thing to do with GPT-3, and it's totally blowing your mind. And so I guess my question is, do we appreciate GPT-3 the appropriate amount? It's obviously, it's very possible that it's overhyped. And the counterpoint to Matt Ridley's thing is that there's also this hype cycle thing, which actually Matt Ridley writes about as well, where like stuff is the implications are overhyped for the short term and underhyped for the long term. I guess that's not quite contradictory. And I think that's very possible for GPT-3. Or I could just totally be wrong about all of this. I don't know. I'm just riffing. And I'm not an AI expert. I'm not in this industry. Who's to say I have a good insight of what GPT-3 is appropriate for or capable of. But anyways, been thinking about it. So, and yet, sorry, one sec, just fix my mic. It's just doing that thing where it's just like you fix it and then it just sags again. Come on. So GPT-3, if you're unfamiliar, is like autocomplete on steroids. So you give it a prompt, some text, right? And it completes that prompt, but not just gibberish like random words that sound like they would go good one after another, but with like a much broader context than typical autocomplete does. And it's trained on just the internet, as far as I understand. Just tons and tons of internet words, into internet phrases and paragraphs and entire documents. It can write in a style that sounds really smart. It can write like a thesis. It can mimic all sorts of styles. And if you don't pay very close attention, the sentence will even look or sound smart. They might even be smart. But I find when you really read closely, you'll find that there's a lot of sentences or paragraphs that kind of don't say anything, which is often the case for highly educated human writers. Makes you think. So as a former professional writer, I feel like I have an appreciation for GPT-3 in the sense that a lot of times what I felt like my goal was when I would sit down to write was, okay, I know what word comes straight to mind when I'm next. I've written some words and the brain, which is very much about like pattern recognition and think of the way we memorize things. If I ask you for the 50th word in a song, that might not come straight to mind. That's easy for a computer to do typically, just the index 49. But for a human, you'd probably want to start at the beginning, and we remember one word and how each word follows each other. Like each word is the prompt for the next word, right? And so when you're writing, you kind of have an automatic word you want to say next that you frequently pair with this. There's cliches or metaphors or just, common patterns of speech that you use as a writer. Especially for me, I was writing about gadgets, and there was like 7 kinds of gadgets when I started. There was cameras, there were screens, there was computers, there was MP3 players, there wasn't printers, I guess. I already said cameras, I'm running out very quickly. So I would try and challenge myself to come up with a different word to follow that would surprise me, that maybe would surprise the reader. And I found that would actually really improve my writing. And so there's a sense for me where if GPT-3 could come up with the sentence that I would have come up with, if I write a sentence and it's the same sentence that GPT-3 would have written, it's like, did my sentence even matter? Like that GPT-3 is just based on pattern recognition of the whole internet. So I just wrote a sentence that is the same sentence that the whole internet would come up with. So what am I really contributing here? And so I find that improved my writing by trying to avoid autocomplete. And I find that I appreciate GPT-3. Wow, why is that so hard to say? GPOT. Let's call it GPOT. I appreciate. Let's not do that. I appreciate it because, in a sense, it's what I do when I'm kind of on autopilot. So it makes sense to me in that sense. Obviously, I don't have the whole billions of trillions of internet words in my head, but I've got a lot of life experience that leads me to write the same sentences over and over, and I'm always trying to fight that. I actually use Gmail. You know how Gmail prompts you to write an email? I have my own personal email is now on Fastmail, but I've got old email addresses still on Gmail. So if I get an email on Gmail, when you go to reply, Gmail will have like several possible prompts for you. And very often it is exactly what I was about to write. But what I use it as is a challenge. Okay, I was going to say something, but that's the same thing a robot would come up with. Here's a chance for me to come up with something better, you know? So I always try to write beyond or differently than the prompt. Not just beyond. I try not to even start with that as a starting point. And so yeah, okay. So I'm reading from my notes here. Do you in fact use Gmail? Yeah, it's a healthy exercise and feels subversive somehow. And it's also, yeah, it's depressing how often the prompt is truly correct. If I hadn't seen the prompt, I would have just written that thing. So I can appreciate some of the positive use cases for, or at least I can appreciate in some sense what GPT-3 is doing, what its skill is of the automatic sentence. But what about the evil use cases? And so what prompted me to think that I should write about this thing that has had 100 think pieces per day about it since it was launched, or I guess the beta started. I don't even know when the beta started. There's a lot of thoughts out there about GPT-3, and I encourage you to go find some of them because they're interesting. But there was this one article that I saw on Twitter from some I think it was a Bitcoiner who retweeted it, and I can't figure out or remember who actually retweeted this. But there's this Twitter person named J River Long. And his article says, in a GPT-3 world, anonymity prevents free speech. Now, this is a strong, yet somehow mundane claim. It's like it's using a lot of very common words, very common ideas. We're always talking about free speech, anonymity, and GPT-3. Why not put those all together in one headline and write a whole piece about it? I clicked this very quickly. Very effective work, Jay, on clickability for your headline. And then I really struggled to ever read it carefully. And I think because I just very much disagree with the premise right away. And from all my skimming I've done up and down of this article several times, I've never really found anything profound or compelling in here to make me agree with this premise. As far as I understand, his basic argument is that GPT-3 makes astroturfing propaganda basically free. And that somehow governments will have outsized access to this and benefit from this astroturfing of propaganda, and they will drown out individual dissident voices. And so the only solution will be this sort of, you'll have to tie your online identity to a real world identity with some sort of mechanism, and therefore we all have to be doxxed forever to be able to speak truth to power, something like that, right? And anonymous voices will have no weight in this GPT-3 AstroTurf world. So like first off, I feel like he's just missing or not really addressing the potential for GPT-3 AstroTurfing on both sides, right? We've got computers too. We can AstroTurf. Maybe if the government puts a budget on, training another GPT Gov for pure propagandistic purposes. Like maybe I can't afford that level of GPT-3 or GPT-ness. So maybe they'll have an advantage over me in that sense. But I just think there is a lot more collective intelligence out in the world than there is concentrated intelligence in government. And I think the AstroTurf war would not be one-sided. I think it would be very interesting and very, very awful and a lot of spam. But I also think he's wrong on this, like that the alternative to anonymity is real-world IDs, like pseudonymity and having a constant identifier with some level of assurance that it's the same person behind that identifier or the same entity, that there's a consistent set of basically private keys that are or keep on signing these messages from this one identifier. So there's some constancy. It's not perfect, but you know, you have some certainty that this is a constant identifier of so that it's not a puppet, you know. I think that's my hope for the world. I think we need a lot of pseudonymity, and I think that will be really, really good. And so, yeah, I'm just not super stressed about his apocalypse, but maybe I'm not paying attention because there's also, I literally have not read this whole piece word for word. And it's not even that long. It's just kind of hard to read. And my eyes kind of slide right off of it. And also, you look into it, Jay Riverlong, who are you, Jay Riverlong? Jay Riverlong doesn't exist on the internet outside of this blog and this Twitter account. Jay Riverlong joined Twitter in June of 2020. Interesting timing, Jay. I did a reverse image search for his photo, found nothing. And it's a nice little headshot, you know? So maybe it's one of those fake human profile pics. I don't even know. And I'm not even the first person to have this thought about Jay. Someone writes, "Hi, Jay. I enjoyed reading your blog, but you don't appear to exist prior to a month ago. Either you're writing under a pseudonym or you're a bot. I'd like to try something. Can you do some research about me and tell me something that isn't common knowledge? I blog and use Hacker News. Smiley face." To which Jay replies, "I will happily pass your CAPTCHA, smiley face. You work at the Quebec AI Institute. I like your blog's focus on graphs. I did a lot of graph theory in college, and I'd be interested in what you think of Stephen Wolfram's graph theoretic model of the universe. See," and then he links to Stephen Wolfram's graph theory of the universe. Okay. Whatever. Jay seems to have passed Brandon's test. But how can I be sure that Brandon isn't a bot or a plant? And how can I verify that Jay's CAPTCHA answers for myself? Like, you know, I'm taking Brandon's word that they're sufficient. And even if I did all that, it's a lot of work, a lot of effort to make sure that, you know, now every time I read anything, I got to go check if it's a bot. This is a lot of effort, especially without like good public key cryptography, like message signing, which I think will hopefully be helpful with some of this stuff so that we're not constantly checking if things are bots. But there's also a sense of which, does it matter whether or not Jay's a bot? Because this is one of those conversations I'd love to have Dieter around for, because he was really into this kind of stuff. But the meaning and lack of meaning of Jay's writing, the sense and nonsense, is a product of my own brain. I'm reacting to external stimuli, but I'm creating that whatever I think the meaning is. So to the extent in which a GPT-3 or GPT-4 crafted essay can make me think productively, it's helpful. And also, perhaps obviously, but maybe very important to point out, if I'm taking any paragraphs of prose that I find from some random person on the internet as gospel, then I'm going to die of misinformation long before the AstroTurf bots get me. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm just believing everything without any critical thinking, I'm dead. So I gotta keep an eye out. So I don't think there's some new special danger that is here. Or maybe I'm missing something, but it doesn't seem to me that there's much of a novel danger here, because I'm already in trouble if I'm believing things uncritically. Now, I have also always been in the camp of believing very strongly in the importance of authorial and intent, in the sense that what it really means is, in some sense, what the author meant to say. But also, I have to admit that doesn't matter, and it's kind of wishful thinking, because how can we know what the author truly meant to say? All we really have is the text, you know? And if the author says, "Oh, what I meant is," I don't even know if they're, it's telling me the truth at this point. So, authorship without intent, right, is kind of just another opportunity to think critically. So the words generated by GPT-3, I'm going to say that this is not sentience, right? This is not true AI or whatever you want to call it. This is pattern matching. There's no intent behind it. But it's still an opportunity for my brain to come up with meaning when presented with this stuff. So in the same way that Google's prompts have helped train me to write sentences that don't show up in the autocomplete, GPT-3 pros can train us to reject nonsense, illogic, wasted words, and paragraphs without semantic meaning, which I'm arguing that there's a ton of generated by regular old humans, including myself. I'm sure I've done a lot of those. In the past, we might struggle through a dumb paragraph that feels self-contradictory or non-productive. But maybe someday soon we might just assume that dumb paragraph was written by a bot. And so therefore it has no, why even bother? It's almost like noise to us, like, oh, well, this is obviously a bot paragraph. I'm just going to skip to the next one where maybe I will find some meaning. We might end up with a lot of false positives using this tactic. But I also do think that truly original, non-autocomplete, non-completable sentences and ideas, stuff that can't be generated through pattern matching, because I do believe that stuff still exists. I think that stuff could shine through the noise. Or if something really cool is a new novel combination that was generated by this pattern matching of a robot, but when I absorb the meaning, I find it to be deeply insightful, that will shine through, and I think I can take value there as well. So I don't feel necessarily harmed by the existence of this spam, because I think the spam both helps me learn to reject spam that is human generated, and also to truly zero in on actually semantically meaningful sentences and thoughts. So this is a little more physicsy. This is kind of, again, from the Matt Ridley book, but something I've been thinking about for a long time, and I just wasn't really that smart to put it together. Whenever we do useful work, we decrease entropy locally, but we increase entropy in the universe, like the total entropy, because entropy always decreases. Entropy always increases. So if you're going to decrease entropy somewhere, it's got to increase more somewhere else in some sense. The steam engine moves water uphill, right? So that would be decreasing entropy. You're fighting the natural order of things in some sense. But to do that, it converts coal into heat and smoke, right? Which is, it's dissipating heat. It's chaos. You're taking this ordered object and you're turning into this sort of chaos. So I just have this vibe, and it's not totally borne out yet, but that GPT-3's obvious potential for generating noise and meaninglessness on a grand scale can actually help us highlight signal and meaning on small scales. So one interesting example is GPT-3 as a coder. And if you haven't seen these examples, like, people will write in a specification and then GPT-3 will write the code for it for simple things like, give me a banner that says welcome and a button that says sign up, or something like that. A blue button that says sign up. And GPT-3 will write the HTML that would do that, which is pretty cool, pretty impressive. There are a lot of dumb errors that I make as a coder that something like GPT-3 that's good at pattern matching could probably help me recover from. So the classic example, when you're learning to code early on. If you're in a language where semicolons are a meaningful thing, where you end a line with a semicolon, but only some lines, and you're not really sure which because you just started programming, and why do you need to put semicolons at the end of a line? That's dumb, to your mind. So you just leave it off randomly, accidentally, and then your code doesn't work, and you don't know why. And it's hard to diagnose that it is a semicolon lack. And even if you didn't know that, your brain, your eyes aren't even trained well at finding spots where semicolons go, which something like after a few years of programming, it's very natural and quick and easy for me, but was very difficult early on. Well, a pattern matching robot is just going to be great at this sort of thing. And I think could be a really nice little helper when you're doing some code. It's like, oh, I know that this language has like a for loop type thing where it's instead of like that for, like the I plus plus, I less than or equal to kind of construction of a for loop, the old timey C style. There's like a for in or for of, but I can't quite remember what. So you could write something that's kind of close, and I feel like a pattern matcher, like, okay, I see what they're going for. I'll snap that to what real code actually looks like in this language. I could imagine a lot of great stuff along those lines. And I'm obviously not the one who's invented the fact that GPT-3 could be good at coding, because people are obviously doing this. But yeah, so I think there's something really interesting there. I think that kind of thought, like GPT-3 will highlight really rote pattern matching parts of our jobs. As knowledge workers, not just, not factory workers anymore, knowledge workers, there's a lot more rote things that we're doing that computers can help us with than maybe they have been able to before. Maybe I'm overselling GPT-3's capabilities, but it seems very obviously on a path to increasing the amount of stuff computers can help us do. And like, if my job is dumb, I'm saved from drudgery. If I am dumb, I don't know where semicolons go. The world is saved from my stupidity. And then if GPT-3 is dumb, then I don't have anything to fear about being replaced. I think it's a win-win-win, but, feel free to debate in the comments that don't exist on this podcast. As the bot, I guess there are comments on YouTube, so that's something. As bots learn to handle the routine, we have more time to discover what is novel, different, complicated, and important. GPT-3 just feels weird because it's mental routine, but I can't imagine the current vibe is much different than when human computers, well, that's what we used to call people who did like routine math professionally, they were called computers. So that's where we got the name from. Imagine when they learned about calculators, it's like, yeah, right. Like a thing that I do in my brain can be done by a machine. That seems pretty silly, but look at us now. So one last thought about GPT-3, and I'm going to let you go. What if GPT-3 made Netflix shows? I think there's something really interesting, because I've been imagining ever since Jay wrote this really weird article, if that is his real name. Imagine anything, and now imagine infinite variations on that theme. So now, like, you have Shakespeare plays, right? Imagine if you had billions of knockoff Shakespeare plays with minor variations, but that were still like readable and seemed to kind of make sense. I think there's something interesting about this, like shovelware content. Like we experience this in our real lives. Like if you go on the Android App Store, search for any a generic game type, and then there's like 7,000 clones. Even if there was one canonical version originally, the clones, sort of drown it out. It's kind of hard to even find the original. So the example I've got is like, imagine if a bot made a clone of Overwatch and called it Schmoverwatch. That would be kind of interesting to me. Like it's the same game in some sense. It's got like new character designs, but they're like sort of familiar. It's got new lore, but kind of doesn't make sense. But like, does the regular Overwatch lore? I don't even know what it is. I think there's bad guys and good guys. I don't even know. Maybe they're both good. Maybe they're both bad. Who knows? It's got similar mechanics, but with some like arbitrary twists. That would be kind of cool. I think I would play that clone. And I'd find interesting things like, I didn't know that I liked Overwatch for this reason, but it turns out, man, if you tweak this, you get something dumb. Or like, oh, wow, Overwatch tweaked in this way is actually really fun. Like maybe this would be a good idea for the actual game. But 1,000 or 1,000,000 clones like this, who has the time? So they start to become meaningless. And that's kind of how I feel about Netflix's current catalog of content. Netflix makes like movies that are slightly better than made for TV movies. And it makes TV shows that are slightly better than like maybe what used to be on like ABC or something back in the day. And there's familiar actors in them. There's a movie on Netflix with Chris Hemsworth in it. And there's like pretty good special effects from what I can tell. And it's like kind of almost good enough plot and dialogue. But it's almost like none of it matters. Nothing happens in these shows matter. There's nothing really heightened or very vibrant about this. I mean, obviously there are really standout exceptions. But for the most part, what I feel about most of Netflix's catalog, I just find like there's like very little semantic meaning. Like it might have as well been bot generated because like nothing stands out. Like that person said the thing that person should say. That was an autocomplete response by like, NPC characters in this show. And so, yeah, I kind of felt like that with Jay's writing, where it doesn't matter if Jay's a bot or not. There's something I kind of found uninteresting. I'm so sorry, Jay. I'm sure you're a very nice person. Something kind of uninteresting about his paragraphs, and something kind of uninteresting about his point, although it was obviously a prompt for this whole podcast. So obviously something not uninteresting about it in the same time. Yeah, it doesn't really matter with Netflix whether or not there's a bot generating these TV shows. I'm fairly certain that's not. I think real people film them and act in them and write them. But I just don't find much novel interestingness, like true actual information in this content. Like if you think of most Netflix shows, you could probably describe them by naming another thing or a combination of things, right? Which is true for most entertainment, but there have been times in our lives where something truly novel showed up. Or something that was such a radical combination that it really made us perk up and listen. Or was executed with such high quality that even though it was a retread, it really stood out. So my hope is that as GPT-3, GPOT, or some mythical GPOT-4 begin to infiltrate our daily content consumption habits, we'll start to raise the bar. And for me right now, the bar is typically above Netflix. I'm not trying to say like I'm the world's greatest person or connoisseur of entertainment, but for me, it's usually above Netflix. I'm sorry. Before I leave you, there are some more ideas. I guess I've been working on this for a while, and so I ended up with a big grab bag of ideas in here. So I'll just put this in some bullet points at the end. Encrypted information looks random. So if you embed it in a ton of other random information, it can be hard to find the encrypted information. Or you can also embed encrypted information into something that's normal, like there's steganography is you put an encrypted message inside like a picture. So it's a way to like transmit encrypted information in the clear. Like, the old timey thing, you like put some words, like every fourth word in a newspaper article is like some sort of secret message or something. It's just something to think about. Because when you think about GPT-3, you're just thinking of these volumes of potentially meaningless stuff that looks meaningful. And so you're trying to think, what do you do with that? Maybe GPT-3 generated content can provide plausible deniability for someone who wants to say something but doesn't want to get in trouble. Hide the real thoughts in a sea of fake thoughts. Of course, now you have a new problem. How do you discern what the real thoughts are? Need some sort of decryption on the other end. Another thing that I didn't really get into here that's obviously very interesting is GPT-3 centaurs, like advanced chess, where you have a human and an AI component, like a friend, basically, or not a friend. That's not the right word. You are a human and you use AI to generate things, and then you choose what you think is the best from the AI choices, or you make a choice and then you run it through AI to see whether that is a good choice. And so those combos are typically, as far as I know, still better than solo humans or solo AI players at chess. And so I think there's something interesting there that's potential for writing, for code and for prose. So something to keep an eye out for. I had this other thought. Wait, I should put this down in my notes. There's something about novel writing, writing something that's novel, something that's new and interesting and different, that in some sense, I don't know if it's easier to detect or harder. It's probably easier to detect. I think it sticks out. If something that you say doesn't match the typical patterns of speech, I think it sticks out. I'm just trying to think for the terms of like automated algorithmic like censorship or ranking or, that kind of stuff, where GPT-3 generated stuff steps in. Is that going to help you, slip through? Like maybe you write something really radical and then you run it through a GPT-3 dummifier that makes everything look kind of boring, but the radical concept's still somehow embedded inside of there. Or I don't know if there's a vice versa. Maybe that's where you need a decryption thing to get the radical idea back out of this dumb seeming paragraph. I don't know. I just think there's a lot. It's just really fun to think about. And yeah, like I said at the beginning, obviously a lot of people have there's a lot of pieces out there, a lot of thoughts about GPT-3. And I'm sure these are not highly original, but I thought of them myself. So, whatever. All right. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here today at my TED Talk. I will try to at least have an episode once a week. I got to get back to inviting people for the show. If you know someone who should definitely be on this show, please hit me up and let me know about them. And have a great week. Thank you, Paul.